October 6, 1945. Yamagata Prefecture, Honshu, 5:40 fog lay low enough to touch. The rice stubble smoked with dew. Where the lane should have crossed the river, there was only a torn mouth of soil and two drowned abutments black with moss. The American engineers rolled to a halt. Two trucks, a trailer with timbers, a canvas tool chest stamped U.S., a white bedsheet hung from a bamboo pole on the far bank. Beneath it, a dozen villagers knelt, faces down, hands open, as if trying to give the morning back. Someone had painted the sheet with brushy characters that meant surrender, apology, and a kind of hope. Sergeant Thomas Cooper dropped from the lead truck and felt the cold climb his boots. A child coughed. The river answered with a low, steady sound like a saw biting wet wood. A sandal turned in the current, spun once, and vanished under a tongue of foam. Lieutenant Arthur Klein raised his field glasses, lowered them, and said what engineers say instead of prayers. Width 15 meters. Velocity brisk. Abutment salvageable. He looked at the kneeling line and then at the sky. We can do this before dark if the river cooperates. Behind him, the tool chest thumped to the ground like a decision waiting for a signature. October 1945 was a strange month in Japan. The war had ended cleanly on paper, messily in people. Surrender was formal, absolute, and unmistakable. But peace had not yet learned how to walk. It staggered through valleys like this one, late and uncertain, wearing American boots and a Japanese heartbeat. General Headquarters in Tokyo had issued its early directives: disarm, respect civilians, rebuild transport arteries where feasible, provide medical aid at officer discretion, no fraternization. These rules came printed on pocket cards carried by every enlisted man, already creased at the corners. Far from the cities, rules blurred into weather and terrain. Roads that existed on maps did not exist in mud. Telephone poles stood without wires. Rivers ran higher than memory. The surrender had done nothing to tame the mountains. The 27th Engineer Battalion had been tasked with inspecting a damaged railway trestle 40 miles east. Their convoy made it only 23 before the valley road narrowed into a stubborn ribbon of dirt. A night storm had pushed a tributary beyond its patience. The bridge, never more than hacked pine and faith, collapsed under its own soaked weight. Lieutenant Arthur Klein, newly promoted and already tired of being saluted, ordered a halt. He had the look of a man built for drafting tables, thin wrists, spectacles too academic for a battlefield. But he had survived Leyte and Okinawa, and mud no longer discouraged him. He stepped out, breathed the cold, and marked the span in his head like an equation. Sergeant Thomas Cooper followed. A Tennessee River kid before he became a combat engineer. Shoulders like split oak, quiet eyes. He could read a current better than he could read a newspaper. He crouched at the lip of the broken road and jabbed the soil with a stick. "Scour factor's bad," he muttered. "Water wants this spot." P.F.C. Eli Navarro Carpenter's son, hands gentle even when they carried a rifle, took measurements without being told. He favored knots over words. Most men trusted him more for a .cpl. Maeve O'Connor, the medic, inventoried her kit. Her movements were brisk, disciplined, but not cold. She had treated civilians in Manila's ruins, and now she read this valley. With the same wary tenderness, checking faces for sickness, posture for hunger, breath for fear. Fear was everywhere. Rumors had outrun the G as weeks earlier. Stories twisted by exhaustion and loss, that Americans burned villages, that they shot farmers who hid soldiers, that they took children away. That mercy was a trick. None of it matched the occupation orders. But a rumor did not need truth to create terror, it needed only echo. And these mountains held echoes like a vault. On the far bank, the villagers had gathered before sunrise. A dozen at first, then 2 dozen. then nearly the whole valley, barefoot in the cold. Heads bowed. Kneeling wasn't custom, it was insurance. The white sheet had been Sato Haruko's idea. Haruko was the village's widowed schoolteacher, 34, thin from rationing, strong from necessity. She had kept her students alive through 2 winters by turning lessons into chores and chores into lessons. When the bridge collapsed, she had crossed upstream at dawn by clinging to a rope anchored between 2 willows. She saw the American trucks from a slope and ran back to warn the others. Stay calm, show no weapons, be humble, bring the children inside. But some children insisted on watching. Ichiro, the brave one, the stubborn one, 12 years old, stood behind the kneeling adults, gripping a splintered broom handle like a spear he would never use. He knew a handful of English words from a frayed grammar book. Yes, thank you. Water. Sorry. He practiced them under his breath, terrified he'd forget them if needed. When the engineers dismounted, the villagers lowered their foreheads almost to the dirt. Cooper and Navarro exchanged a glance. Hell, Cooper whispered, they think we're here to punish them. Klein had the same realization half a heartbeat later. He cleared his throat, stepped forward, and raised both hands, not in surrender, but in a universal gesture older than flags. No harm, he said, slow and steady. We're engineers. Bridge inspection. His words didn't travel far, but his tone did. Haruko, standing just behind the kneeling line, listened hard. Her English was delicate but intact. She swallowed her fear, lifted her head, and responded with the phrase she had practiced all night. We. No fight. Only ask. Please help. Klein blinked. Cooper's jaw tightened. Navarro exhaled through his nose. The world they'd prepared for enemy cliffs. Hidden rifles, ambush had vanished with the war. What stood before them now was something harder than combat. Vulnerability. Klein nodded once. Ma'am, he said gently, we'll see what we can do. And with that, the day stopped being about orders and started being about a river that needed crossing. The next decision would shape the entire valley's winter. Cooper squatted at the edge of the gap. Boots on crumbling dirt, eyes on the water. The river wasn't big. 15 meters bank to bank. Waist deep at most in the center. Back home, he'd have called it a creek. But creeks kill too if you let them choose the terms. Overnight rain had turned it from clear to clay. The current rolled not in waves, but in low muscular shoulders, bumping off the abutments with a sound like someone tearing cloth very slowly. Bits of timber and straw bobbed through, then were gone. A log pinned against a rock for 3 seconds, then snapped free and spun away. He watched the speed. Counted. 1,000, 1,000. Picked a rock, watched a leaf race it. 3 seconds to cover the span. Too fast for children. Too fast for the old. Too fast for anyone carrying anything heavier than regret. Navarro came up behind him with his notebook. Span's about 48 feet, Sarge. Banks are soft. Abutments are old stone, set shallow. Timber was cheap and wet. Options? Cooper asked. Navarro ticked them off, carpenter brain running even as his breath steamed. Rope ferry. We throw a line across, rig a trolley or a hand over hand. Good for a few at a time, not grain or sick folks. Yeah. Suspension footbridge with planks, cables, and trees, decking slung. We don't have proper cable or turnbuckles. Just hemp and a prayer. 2 big stringers across. He tapped his pencil in the air. Then lay planks. Use what we've got on the trailer. Anchor into the old stone if it holds. Cooper nodded slowly. River's touchy. She rises on a tantrum. She takes the stringers with her if we don't seat 'em right. Behind them, Klein had his map case open. No maps didn't show you temper. He listened as if they were citing doctrine. What's the minimum safe load? Klein asked. Single file one at a time? Navarro said. Any kid carrying bundles fine. 2 men side by side, maybe. Ox carts, absolutely not. Don't need ox carts, Haruko said quietly from the bank, hands folded in front of her. Only people. And rice sacks. And sick ones. She hesitated. Old Takata-san, he. She mimed a hunched back and a cane. Language didn't matter. Weight did. Cooper stood, wiped his hands on his trouser thighs. Sir, a ferry means we're here all day moving folks back and forth. Maybe tomorrow, too. We get orders to move, they're stranded again. A bridge, even a skinny one, means we leave something behind besides tire tracks. Regulations say our priority is transport infrastructure connected to GHQ-designated routes, Klein said automatically. He could see the paragraph in the field order. He could also see the way Haruko's shoulders tightened at the word regulations, though she didn't know what it meant. Rail trestle 30 clicks east, he added. We're late already. Cooper looked upriver. A bend, a steeper bank, a hint of another crossing if you were desperate and foolish. Downriver, the valley tightened into rock where the river chewed at its own confinement. He spat into the dirt, small, respectful. Sir, that trestle carries trains sometime next month. This bridge carries these people today. O'Connor stepped closer, boots skidding a little in the churned mud. I walked through the village while you two measured rocks, she said. They've got one midwife, no doctor. The nearest clinic is on this side of the river. If anyone gets sick while it's up like this... She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Klein looked at his watch, then at the sun, not yet visible but announcing itself with a brighter patch of cloud. Engineers measure days and tasks, not hours. Explain the build, he said. Navarro's eyes lit with the calm of a man talking about wood. We use those 3 pine beams on the trailer as primary stringers, he said. Dress the ends with axes, seat them into the old stone. We shore the uphill sides with cribbing rock and timber crib piles. Drive pickets downstream and lash cross braces to keep them from walking. Then decking planks as close as we can manage. Rope handrails both sides better than nothing. Anchors? Cooper asked. Deadman logs buried back from the bank, Navarro replied. Hemp lashing soaked and pulled tight. She sway, but she won't go unless the river really comes up. Klein nodded. His brain did its own math. 3 hours for site prep, 2 for seating stringers, 2 for decking and rails, 1 for tests and adjustments. Light by 6 o'clock, dark by 17:30. 10.5 usable hours minus meals they'd probably skip. And if the water rises? He asked. Cooper shrugged one shoulder. Then we see who the river respects most. Haruko listened, heart pounding in her ears louder than the current. She understood only every third word, but the rhythm was unmistakable. They were arguing not about whether to help, but how. That alone made her knees weak with a relief she didn't dare show. We can't leave equipment, Klein said finally, almost to himself. Lumber is expendable. Tools are not. The sentence sounded like it came from a manual. Cooper glanced back at the trailer, at the canvas chest with its iron hinges and stenciled letters. Saws, augers, wrenches, hammers. A treasure hoard in a valley where one rusty nail had to be straightened and reused 3 times. We'll need them all back to finish the railway, Klein continued. And we're responsible. Signed for every piece. Behind them, Ichiro shifted, clutching his broom-handle staff. He watched the men point at the river, the truck, to sky each other. He knew enough to understand that the big green box on the trailer was important. Tools, his teacher had told them, were the real treasure of modern life. With tools, you could fix anything. A gust of wind cut through the valley. The white sheet on the bamboo pole snapped and fluttered, then settled. The river rolled on, unimpressed by paperwork, Klein closed his map case with a decisive thwop. "All right," he said. "We build. A temporary footbridge, single file only. We log the lumber as expended, the delay as justified. We move on tomorrow. Today belongs to this river." Cooper exhaled slowly, as if someone had eased a valve. He looked at Haruko. "We'll need help," he said, gesturing to the villagers' men and older boys. "Strong backs. No one goes near the edge without us saying so." Haruko translated, voice gaining strength. Hands went up, tentative at first, then steadily. Fear didn't vanish, but it made room for purpose. The Americans walked back to the truck. Navarro unlashed the first beam. Pike, if he'd been here, would have said something like "Easy does it." Cooper said nothing. The beam thudded to the ground like a first word in a new language. The day's work had found its shape: men, wood, rope, and a current with opinions. What none of them knew yet was that the most important decision would not be about stringers or anchors, but about what stayed behind when the trucks left. The valley woke around the work. Chickens complained from under houses. A dog barked once at nothing and then thought better of it. Smoke trickled from low eaves as someone coaxed breakfast from damp charcoal. The river kept its own commentary, never loud, never polite. The kneeling line slowly broke into smaller shapes. Fear didn't leave. It changed posture. Haruko moved first. She stepped forward, folded the white sheet in half, then in half again, her hands very steady. She bowed to Klein and Cooper, then tucked the cloth under her arm like a lesson completed. "The children will stay back," she said. "Only older boys help, old men, as they can." Cooper nodded. "Fine by me. Nobody under 15 on the bank," he told his squad. "If you see a kid near the edge, you herd him back gentle, not grand." Ichiro bristled. 12, he muttered in Japanese. "Not kid." Haruko didn't have to understand the words to hear the tone. She rested a hand on his shoulder. "You can help with words," she said. "Words are heavier than wood sometimes." Ichiro's chin lifted. Interpreter was a warrior's job in the New World. He took it. O'Connor set up her aid station under the eave of the nearest house table. A water bucket, a roll of bandages, a bottle of carbolic that smelled like a factory had exploded in a herb garden. She waved over the first brave soul, a woman with a rag around her wrist and a winch she'd been carrying for months. "Off," O'Connor said, pointing to the rag. "Show." The woman hesitated, then unwound it. A half-healed cut glared back, angry and red. O'Connor sighed softly. "Could have been worse," she murmured, mostly to herself. She cleaned it, wrapped it, patted the woman's hand. "Arigato," the woman whispered, eyes filling. "De nada," O'Connor said out of habit, then corrected herself. "You're welcome." Around them, GIs and villagers watched each other the way people watch wild animals at a waterhole cautious. Curious, convinced the other is more dangerous than they look. One older man shuffled up to Cooper, bowing from the waist so deeply that his back trembled. He spoke fast, too fast, hands fluttering as if trying to rearrange the air into safety. Ichiro jumped in, words tumbling. He says, "He is sorry. He had sons, 2 army, if eh? Heard Americans, he is." The boy stalled, searching. "Sorry," Cooper supplied quietly. Ichiro nodded. "Sorry, very sorry. Please. No burn village." Cooper's jaw worked for a second. This man's sons might have been the ones who'd shot at his friends on ridges he'd climbed months before. Or maybe they died on some other hill wearing a uniform they never chose. It didn't matter. Cooper shook his head. "No burning," he said. He mimed a roof with his hands. "We fix, not burn." Ichiro translated. The old man sagged like a rope losing tension. He bowed again, slower, and shuffled away to join the work gang with a determination that put younger backs to shame. The human angle of the day was simple and impossible. Fear asking for mercy. Mercy answering with labor. Klein might have been a bookish officer, but he knew that kindness without caution got people killed. He turned from the river to his radio man. "Set up the SCR," he said. "Log our halt. Report. Delay due to infrastructure loss, humanitarian work in progress. If battalion has a problem, they can say so on the wire." He positioned 2 riflemen on the flanks visible, but with muzzles pointed down. The war was supposedly over. Mines and misunderstandings hadn't gotten the message yet. Rules of engagement? One of the riflemen asked. "Rule is, we don't need engagement," Klein replied. "If some stray idiot decides to take a potshot, you put him down, then you get back to watching the water. Otherwise, safety's on, eyes open, mouths shut. Perimeter set." He turned to the worksite. "Cooper, I want a safe lane marked," he said. "We don't need people milling around in our swing arcs." Cooper grabbed stakes from the trailer and knocked them into the mud with efficient blows. Navarro strung rope between them, defining a path from truck to bank. Villagers watched, then began guiding one another along the line as if they'd always had such corridors. Navarro briefed the volunteers with hands and simple words. "Rock here," he said, pointing to a spot where cribbing would go. "Wood here." 2 men. "No, 3, slow." They didn't share language, but they shared physics. A heavy log needs 1 man at each end and 1 in the middle if you don't want crushed toes. That truth doesn't care about flags. Klein kept 1 eye on the sky. Clouds bunched and then thinned. He counted seconds between gusts, listening for the tone of wind that meant trouble. The river's voice shifted by half notes as debris changed. He logged it all without thinking. Military caution persisted. The squad stacked their rifles in a tripod near the truck, locked, safetied, within reach but not in hand. Helmets stayed on. No one removed their web gear. You didn't tempt fate the first month of a peace, but within that ring of readiness, something gentler was happening. Tactical posture contained the risk. It also made space for trust to take tentative steps. The work itself had its own language, the slap of wet timber, the clink of tools, the grunt of men discovering they shared the same limit of strength. Navarro directed the abutment prep. "We scrape this down to solid stone," he said, pantomiming with a pick. "No mud under our beams." He swung the pick himself first, setting pace and depth. Villagers took turns, mimicking his stance, finding the rhythm where tool and man cooperated instead of argued. Cooper supervised the cribbing. They stacked rocks and short timbers downstream of the abutments to catch any rolling debris and to brace the base against the river's sideways shove. He checked each layer for wobble, kicking, frowning, adjusting. "Build like the water is your enemy," he told one of his own privates. "And your teacher." They rigged a simple gin pole from a stripped pine trunk, its top lashed with crossed ropes, its base buried deep and stomped into loyalty. Block and tackle hung from the apex, rope running through pulleys like a thought between 2 brains. "Pay out slow," Navarro told the villagers holding the tail end of the rope. He slapped his hand twice on the line, "Slow." They nodded, set their feet. The first stringer beam was too heavy to manhandle straight into place. They inched it toward the bank with crowbars and shoulder shoves, then slung it under the tackle. Mud-slicked boots. 1 man slipped. Another grabbed his collar before gravity could collect its due. "Hold!" Cooper barked. The line went taut. The beam swung a few inches, then steadied. The river hissed, interested. "Lift," Navarro said. The gin pole bent, complained, obeyed. The beam rose, pivoted, swung out over the water. Every eye on both banks followed its arc as if it were carrying something more fragile than pine, something like a future. "Ease," Cooper called. The beam descended. One end touched stone, slid, then seated into the notch they'd chiseled earlier. Navarro and two villagers leaned, coaxed, cursed softly in two languages. The far end found its cradle with a thump that made the river shudder in its own way. The second stringer went easier, the third easier still. Repetition breeds courage. Planks came next. The trailer's load was finite, the gaps between boards and negotiation between safety and scarcity. Navarro staggered joints, toe-nailing each plank to each stringer, hands moving faster now, almost joyful. A villager with a carpenter's eye joined him without being asked, his old chisel clinking against a GI hammer. Handrails, Cooper said, they ran hemp rope along both sides. Chest high, through posts spiked to the decking at intervals. The rope was rough, stubborn, trustworthy. They pulled it tight while the fibers were wet, knowing it would shrink as it dried and hold tighter still. A village boy scraped his palms on it and grinned. Real handrails were new. The test load was not a sandbag, not a barrel. It was a private named Sloan and a volunteer farmer with a back like a question mark. Cooper sent them out together, 10 paces apart. "Walk like you're going to church," he called. "Not like you're chasing a bus." The bridge bowed a fraction, then held. Planks creaked. Rope hummed. The river licked at the supports, unimpressed, but it allowed the crossing. On the bank, Haruko exhaled for the first time in hours. Her students, clustered behind her, cheered in whispers. The technical success was simple: beam seated, planks nailed, rails tight. The human success was more fragile. A valley's worth of fear had taken its first hesitant steps across something Americans and Japanese had built together and hovering just beyond. The edge of the day's work was a choice that would turn a clever bridge into something more, a choice about ownership, trust, and a certain canvas tool chest that still sat, closed, by the truck. Leadership shows itself in small course corrections more than in speeches. Klein moved along the bank, clipboard under one arm, helmet slightly askew. On paper, he was in charge. On the mud, responsibility moved between him and Cooper like a shared tool. When a villager stepped too close to the edge with an armful of rocks, Klein didn't shout. He closed the distance and tapped the man's elbow, then pointed to his own boots, 2 paces back from the crumble line. He mimed falling, flailing, then pointed at the river. The man understood. Fear of water is universal. So is gratitude for someone who sees your danger before you do. "Thank you." "Tenente," Haruko said quietly, using her memory of Italian ranks from old newsreels and hoping they translated. "Lieutenant," he corrected gently. "Just Klein is fine today." It was the closest he could come to saying, "I am not here as conqueror, not now." Cooper's leadership was more physical. He watched his squad the way he watched the river, listening for off notes. When one private started joking too loudly, nerves spiking out of control, Cooper stepped in. "Hey," he said low. Inside voice. "River's got ears." He held the young man's gaze just long enough to reattach it to the present. Then he clapped his shoulder and handed him a simpler job, staking the safe lane tighter. Some men needed less weight, not more. O'Connor led by calling things what they were. When a toddler with a raspy cough wandered too near the work line, she scooped him up, handed him back to his mother, and mimed a blanket around the child's shoulders. "He's cold," she said. "Sick." The mother nodded, eyes wide. Words barely mattered. The concern did. Haruko's leadership was both quieter and older. She moved among her villagers like a current under the surface, adjusting, steadying, reminding. When tempers flared between two men over whose rock pile was more important, She stepped between them with the teacher's single, unimpressed look. The argument dissolved. Work resumed. At one point, Ichiro froze mid-translation, overwhelmed by the responsibility. Orders were coming too fast. English, Japanese, gestures, all turning into a knot in his throat. Haruko knelt beside him. Slow, she murmured in Japanese. Choose one sentence. Say that, then breathe. Then the next. He did. Leadership is sometimes no more than teaching someone how to breathe in pieces. The word enemy felt increasingly out of place on that bank. It lingered in habits and hesitation, but the day kept bending it into new shapes. Mid-morning, Navarro paused to stretch his back. A villager in his 50s, calloused hands, sun-carved face, slid in to take his place on the crowbar, levering a stubborn rock out of the cribbing hole. Navarro stepped back, letting him work. After a moment, he couldn't help himself. He leaned in to adjust the man's grip. No, here, he said, tapping knuckles, shifting angle. You want leverage, not muscle. The man grunted, tried it, and the rock moved easier. He looked up, surprised, a laugh trapped somewhere between his chest and his mouth. He mimed the motion again, this time smoother, then jabbed a thumb toward his own chest. Tanaka, he said. Navarro hesitated, then jabbed his own thumb. Navarro. They nodded at each other like men introducing tools. Later, during a short break, one of the younger GI Sloan, bridge tester, sat on an overturned bucket, smoking. A teenage girl approached, nervous but determined. She held out a small bundle of onigiri rice balls, slightly misshapen but carefully wrapped in cloth. Please, she said in halting English, cheeks flushing. For work. Sloan looked at the rice, then at Klein, then at O'Connor. Regulations whispered, no fraternization, no gifts. Hunger and something older whispered back. O'Connor caught his eye and gave the smallest shrug. Eat it now, she said. Not a gift if it doesn't last. He smiled, awkward, lopsided, and accepted. Arigato, he said, mangling the vowels. The girl laughed, delighted. You say good, she lied politely. Then she ran back to her friends, who clustered around her like she just negotiated a treaty. On the other side, Ichiro watched an American private pull a small photograph from his breast pocket, a woman on a porch. A baby on her hip, sunlight spilling across a white dress. The private stared at it for a moment, then noticed Ichiro's gaze and held it out. My wife, he said. Baby, 2 months. He mimed rocking. Ichiro nodded, understanding in his bones. Mother, he said, pointing toward the village. Wait! He pressed his hands together as if in prayer, then pointed from his chest to the photo, then back to the village. Same. Somewhere between the gestures and the crooked smiles. Enemy downgraded, itself to other person with someone waiting. The moral angle sharpened around the tool chest. It sat by the truck. Canvas cover thrown back. Trays open like a book. Crosscut saws. Hand drills, chisels, wrenches, extra nails in tidy boxes. To the engineers, it was inventory. To the villagers, it was wealth. Haruko's eyes returned to it again and again. She'd seen her students' fathers make do with one dull plane shared between 3 families, nails straightened and reused until they snapped. These tools represented a future where broken things could be fixed instead of endured. She also knew they were not hers. Not really. Not yet. Near midday, as they paused to let the bridge settle under its own weight, she approached Klein at the edge of the lane. When you go, she began carefully, searching for words. Bridge will stay. We thank you. She hesitated. Tools go. Klein followed her gaze to the chest. The regulations flashed in his head like a signal lamp. All government property will be accounted for during redeployment. Losses must be investigated and justified. Yes, he said automatically. Tools go. We need them for other bridges. Haruko nodded, slow, face carefully neutral. Of course, she said. We are. Grateful already. She walked away with the posture of someone who had not expected more and would not ask. Cooper had been close enough to hear. Later, while Navarro checked the lashings and O'Connor listened to a child's chest with her ear pressed directly to his back, Cooper stood alone by the chest, hands on his hips. He looked across the river. Men and women on the far bank were already eyeing the bridge, weighing it with their bodies before stepping. A teenager tested the rail, bouncing it gently, trusting rope more than he trusted the day's luck. Cooper thought about the winter coming. Snow on these slopes, ice at the river's edges. A bridge that would need new planks, fresh lashings, anchors redug after every flood. He thought about a rusting hinge on a door somewhere, a broken cart axle, a roof tile that would crack under snow. All problems his squad had solved 100 times with the tools in that chest. He also thought about the paperwork, about a supply sergeant in Sendai counting saws, about a form marked missing in red pencil. O'Connor drifted up beside him, as if drawn by the same gravity. You're thinking too loud, she said. Tools, he replied simply. Reg say they go with us. Reg never saw this valley, O'Connor said. Reg doesn't know what happens the first time that bridge loses a plank and nobody has a decent saw, he grunted. Coal tan my hide if I lose government property. He might, she said. Or he might read the report I'll write about how leaving them reduced medical risk and improved stability and blah blah. She shrugged. Sometimes mercy's just policy waiting to be filed properly. Cooper chuckled despite himself. You and your fancy words. Compassion's cheaper than penicillin, she said. Make it sound like that on paper. He looked down at the chest again, then at the villagers. Jiro stood near the far abutment, broom handle forgotten, eyes following every nail Navarro drove. Kid's gonna be dangerous with a hammer, Cooper murmured. Good kind of dangerous, O'Connor replied. Bridge kind. The moral choice crystallized, obey the letter or honor the spirit. The occupation order card in his pocket said, help stabilize civilian life when practical. The tools were practicality made metal. By mid-afternoon, he'd made up his mind. He just hadn't yet figured out how to phrase it in a way that wouldn't sound like insubordination. That phrasing, and the decision that came with it, would arrive when the sun angled low and the first true test of the bridge demanded more than physics. It would demand ownership. And that moment would come sooner than any of them expected, carried not by theory, but by a feverish child and a rising wind. 13:10 by early afternoon, the light had gone from silver to flat white. The air felt thicker, as if the valley were taking a breath it didn't intend to share. The bridge, such as it was, stretched across the gap like a sentence that hadn't decided how to end. 3 stringers, planks nailed, rope rails tight and humming. It looked fragile. It was stronger than it looked. Decking's good, Navarro said, wiping sweat and mist from his forehead in one gesture. We can start crossings. Light loads first. Klein checked his watch. We've got maybe 4 hours of decent light, he said. Let's move the urgent cases, children, sick, elderly. Then food, then whoever else needs to cross. Haruko had a list in her head. She didn't need paper. War had trained her memory. First was old Takeda, spine curved, legs unreliable. Second, Sato Aiko's little girl with the cough that wouldn't leave. Third, a pregnant woman whose due date hovered close like weather. O'Connor listened to the sky more than the list. The wind had shifted, carrying a wet note. She squinted upriver. Feels like more rain, she said. If that river comes up even a foot, our margin disappears. Cooper nodded. We start now, he said. Slow, spaced, disciplined. Nobody runs, nobody carries more than they can drop without crying over it. 1330. The first official crossing looked almost ceremonial. Cooper chose Sloane again, steady, if a little too fond of jokes, and paired him with Tanaka, the older villager who'd worked the crowbar so well. Sloane led, boots careful, rifle slung muzzle down, one hand hooked lightly on the rope rail. Tanaka followed 10 paces behind, feet remembering rice paddies, not bridges. Walk like you're on a porch, not a tightrope, Cooper called. Keep your eyes on the far bank, not the water. Sloane obeyed. The bridge dipped a hand's breadth under his weight, then steadied. Planks creaked, but no more than they should. The rope hummed low. The river hissed, displeased but not yet defiant. Halfway across, a gust of wind shoved sideways. Sloane widened his stance, rode it, laughed once short and nervous. Tanaka wobbled, grabbed the rope with both hands, then found his balance. They stepped onto the far bank to a murmur that was almost applause. Haruko bowed, deep and grateful. Ichiro punched the air once, then pretended he hadn't. Bridge lives, Navarro said. Cooper let himself smile. 14:05 They began moving people. Old Takeda first, one arm over Sloane's shoulder, the other on the rope. Each footstep took an age. The whole valley held its breath so hard that the river felt like it was breathing for them. On the far side, O'Connor had set up a second aid station at the trailhead that led toward the clinic. She met them as they stepped off, checked pulses, nodded them on under the escort of a young GI with orders to walk them to the next village. Next came baskets of rice, bundled on backs with cloth straps. Then bundles of firewood. Then a crate with a small, rattling box inside bottles, clinking. Medicine, Haruko explained. Rare, precious. Every crossing taught them something. How much sway was too much? How many people could be on the planks at once without making the rail sing in the wrong key? When to pause and let the structure rest like a living thing. The river watched and waited. 15:10. The first warning came in the form of a stick. Oh. Connor happened to be looking upriver when she saw it, just a branch riding the current, innocent and wrong. It moved faster than the leaves had in the morning. The water around it piled higher against stones, frothing where it hadn't before. Co-op, she called, voice flat. He followed her gaze. The upstream slope vanished into low cloud where the hills tightened. Somewhere up there, it was raining harder than here. Damn, he whispered. She's coming up. Navarro checked the abutment. Water lines a few centimeters higher than when they'd started. Not much. Enough. Klein saw the shift too, in the way the sound changed deeper, more crowded. How many left that absolutely need to cross today? He asked Haruko. She did a quick count, lips moving. Maybe 30, she said. Some can wait. But Aiko's child? She pointed to a thin girl, maybe 6, eyes too big for her face, cough tearing at her chest even at rest. O'Connor had already listened to the girl's lungs. She needs that clinic, she said. Soon. I don't like the sound. The river, indifferent to their calculations, lifted another inch. 15:25. They decided to push. New rules. Cooper barked. One person at a time from here on. No more loads heavier than a child. We check the posts after each crossing. If that water hits the bottom of the stringers, we stop. He looked at Klein. The question hung unsaid. You back me on this? Klein nodded. No heroics, he warned. The war is over. Nobody dies proving we can outstubborn a river. They sent Aiko's daughter next. O'Connor insisted on carrying her, pack style, the girl's arms wrapped around her neck. The child's breath rattled against O'Connor's ear. It didn't sound like surrender. It sounded like a fight she was losing. The bridge flexed minutely under their combined weight, but held. On the far bank, O'Connor broke into a careful trot, the closest thing to a run she'd allow on those planks. They vanished up the trail toward the clinic, a GI in tow, rain starting to needle their backs. 3 crossings, Navarro muttered. Maybe 4. Before this thing starts complaining for real. Then we pick the 3 that matter most. Cooper replied, 1540. That was when the near accident happened. A teenage boy older than Ichiro, muscles strung tight with the urge to prove himself, stepped forward with a bundle of firewood twice his size. Before anyone could stop him, he headed for the bridge. Shugoi! Someone whispered admiringly. Amazing. No. Haruko snapped, but he was already on the first planks. The wood shifted on his back. He compensated with a lurch that set the bridge rocking sideways more than it liked. The rope rail jerked under his white-knuckled grip. Planks creaked in a pitch O'Connor didn't care for at all. Cooper's chest locked. Stop. He shouted. Freeze. Don't move another inch. Whether the boy understood the words or the pure command in them, he halted. The bundle slid farther, pulling him off center. One foot skidded. Toes found air. His knee buckled. Ichiro, without thinking, darted toward the entrance to the bridge as if he could run out and catch him. Haruko grabbed his collar, yanking him back so hard he yelped out Navarro was closer. He sprinted to the bank, grabbed the rope rail, and leaned his weight into it, trying to damp the sway. Drop it. He yelled, pointing at the firewood. Let it go. The boy hesitated, eyes wide. Wood was scarce. Fire meant cooked rice, warm rooms. Dropping the bundle felt like sacrilege. Klein added his voice, low but carrying. He mimed unshouldering the load, letting it fall. Haruko translated in a single urgent word. Sutet. Drop it. The boy squeezed his eyes shut and obeyed. The bundle slipped from his shoulders, tumbled, hit the planks, bounced once, and then slid through the gap between stringer and rope, plunging into the river. It bobbed twice, then spun away downstream, taking a winter evening's warmth with it. Freed of the awkward weight, the boy clung to the rail, panting. Navarro talked him back step by trembling step until he reached the bank. Haruko grabbed his arm and held on longer than necessary, shaking him once in an anger that was really terror. Cooper sagged imperceptibly, then straightened. That's it, Klein said. No more loads. People only. And if this water rises another handwidth, we shut it down. They all looked at the river. In the space of the last 20 minutes, it had risen just enough to kiss the lowest cross braces of the cribbing. Foam licked at the edges of the stringers, like a dog testing a fence. The valley had just learned that the bridge could save lives. The river was reminding them it could still take them back. The work now narrowed to its sharpest edge, a handful more crossings, a structure under stress, a sky threatening to squeeze the valley closed before they finished, and somewhere tangled in those decisions was Cooper's unresolved choice about the tool's ownership, responsibility, and who would keep building after the trucks drove away. The river was voting. The engineers had to respond. 16:00 rain reached the valley at last, not a downpour, but a tight, needling mist that thickened the air and blurred the valley's edges. It struck the river like a drum roll. The sound changed again, deeper, more insistent. Haruko felt it first. She wrapped her shawl tighter and whispered the word no villager wanted to speak. Aim sur the rainpool. The kind that swelled rivers without warning. Klein checked his watch. 2 hours of daylight, he said. Maybe less with this weather. His voice was steady, but he didn't like the numbers. Not one bit. Cooper knelt at the base of the bridge and pressed his palm to the lowest plank. It wasn't wet from rain. It was wet from the river rising under it. 3 more crossings, he said. That's all. After that, we shut it down. Navarro looked upriver again. 3 if we're lucky. 2 if the river's got something to prove. The villagers gathered closer, eyes on Haruko, trusting her to speak. She held up 4 fingers, then shook her head and lowered one. 3. 3 chances left. Not enough for comfort. Just enough for faith. 1610. Crossing 1. First of the last 3 was a woman in her 20s carrying a boy who might have been 5. His breathing was labored, the kind O'Connor recognized even without a stethoscope. Lungs struggling. Infection digging deep. Haruko guided her forward. Slow, Cooper warned. 1 step at a time. Hold the rope. Keep the boy close. The bridge accepted their weight with a low groan. The planks bowed not dangerously, but more than before. The river slapped the underside, hungry for mistakes. Halfway across, wind surged. The woman froze, grip slipping. Cooper's voice cut through the rain. Look at me. Eyes on me. Breathe with me. Step, step. She listened. She crossed. When she reached the far bank, her knees gave out and O'Connor caught the child. Running the pair toward the trail without a word, Cooper didn't watch them go. He was staring at the bridge, at the trembling ropes, at the water level creeping upward. 2 crossings left. 1625. Crossing Tooth. Second was more complicated. One of the older men, Inoue, refused to leave his wife behind. She was frail, barely able to stand. Inoue insisted on carrying her on his back. Cooper scanned the couple and made his decision fast. She goes. He waits. Haruko translated. Inoue shook his head hard. The rain thickened, blurry as grief. We don't have time for pride, Navarro urged, voice soft. Let us try. Inoue looked at his wife. She nodded once, a tiny gesture, but full of trust. Navarro stepped forward. I'll take her, he said, stooping so she could climb onto his broad back. Light as a sack of feathers. He winked at her. She returned a tired but genuine smile. The crossing began. Navarro bent his knees, absorbing the sway with trained instinct. The woman tightened her grip around his neck but didn't make a sound. Easy. He murmured. Easy, Obasan. Almost there. The sway steadied. Navarro stepped off the far bank, soaked to his calves. The villagers on that side took the woman gently from his back. Cooper exhaled. 1 crossing left, but by now the river was touching the underside of the planks, not kissing it. Striking it. 1640. Last crossing. A hush fell over the valley. No one wanted to say the name, but every gaze turned to Ichiro. The boy didn't need prompting. He stepped forward without hesitation, rain sliding down his cheeks like a second expression. Haruko grabbed his wrist. No, she whispered. Not you. You are too small. Ichiro shook his head. I must help, he said. I am strong. I can walk fast. Klein crouched to his level. It's not about strength, he said. It's about timing. And we're running out. Cooper studied the bridge, studied the river, studied the boy's face, earnest, determined, terrified of disappointing more than of dying. Finally he said, 1 rule, Ichiro. If I tell you to run, you run. Do not look back. Ichiro nodded. He stepped onto the bridge. A single plank creaked, a warning but not a refusal. He walked. Light footsteps. Quick, balanced. The bridge bounced gently under him, reacting to the smallest weight. The river hammered the supports. Foam surged over the lowest braces. 1 rope rail shook as wind clawed at it. Faster, Cooper called. Ichiro obeyed. His small feet pattered over wet wood. 1 slip, 1 recovery. A heartbeat in Cooper's throat. Halfway. A branch slammed the structure. A loud crack echoed wood, protesting the strain. Run? Cooper roared. Ichiro sprinted. The bridge lurched sideways. A plank dipped. The river grabbed at the gap. But the boy was already leaping the last step, stumbling into O'Connor's arms as she caught him. He looked back, chest heaving. "I did not fall." Cooper didn't answer verbally. He raised one hand in salute. Then he walked to the entrance of the bridge and placed a palm on the trembling rail. "That's it," he whispered. "She's done." The river, as if satisfied, struck once more and one of the lower supports cracked clean through. The bridge held for 3 seconds, long enough for everything to be understood. Then it folded into the current, like a page turning in the wind. The tools remained on the bank, dry, waiting, and the engineers knew what came next. Night took the valley gently, as if afraid to disturb what the river had already claimed. On the eastern bank, the villagers huddled beneath a shrine overhang, drying children with spare cloth and sharing what little rice they had. The older woman Navarro carried now slept peacefully against her husband's chest, exhaustion and relief tangled together. Echiro sat beside Haruko, legs shaking uncontrollably, not from fear, but from adrenaline wearing off like a tide retreating. Across the ruined channel, Klein knelt where the bridge had once begun. Rain had tapered off to a thin drizzle, more memory than weather. Cooper joined him, hands on his knees, breathing slow. "You did good, Tom," Klein said. Cooper shook his head. "River did better." Klein chuckled once. Rivers usually do. Behind them, Navarro and O'Connor laid out the remaining tools beneath a canvas flap. Hammers wiped clean, saws oiled. The good ropes coiled, the worn ones retired. Their motions were quiet, almost ritualistic. Not because they needed to be. Careful, because they needed to acknowledge the gravity of leaving something behind. From the far bank, a small lantern flickered. Haruko was waving it, testing to see if the Americans were watching. They were. Cooper stood, rain dribbling off his helmet. "We leave the tools," he said, not as a suggestion. As a sentence, Klein didn't argue. He simply lifted a crate, set it near the base of the destroyed abutment, and stepped back. "They'll rebuild?" he murmured. "Better than ours?" Navarro asked, appearing at his side. "Maybe. A beat, probably." The river gurgled below, swallowing the last wood fragments with a slow churn. 2015. The Civil Affairs Ledger. O'Connor pulled her medical bag close and sat on an overturned timber. She opened the Civil Affairs Ledger, the thick brown book meant to document aid delivered to civilians. 23 crossings completed, she wrote. 0 casualties. She paused. Then added, in smaller script, "Bridge lost to rising water. Tools left intentionally." She closed the ledger gently. Pages like these would be read months later by officers who never felt a wet plank or heard villagers whisper prayers. They would see numbers columns of them and never know the warmth of the boy who had crossed last or the gratitude in a bowed head. But that was fine. The numbers still mattered. They told a story, even if it was not the whole one. 2040. The call from HQ. The portable radio hissed alive. "River section, this is Outpost Fuji. Come in." Klein keyed the mic. "River section. Go ahead. Report status. Mission complete. Civilians evacuated. Bridge compromised by hydrology change. We left reconstruction tools." There was a long pause. Then, surprisingly, HQ said only, "Understood. Proceed to staging at sunup. No reprimand. No debate about property or policy." Someone higher up had already decided that mercy, once given, didn't need justification. Cooper exhaled. "That's that." O'Connor smiled. "Maybe the war really is over." Navarro nudged a crate with his boot. "Then maybe we can finally act like it." 2110. A lantern crossing the dark on the far side. Villagers lit more lanterns. Not in celebration. Not in mourning, but in acknowledgement, A line of lights stretched up the trail toward the mountain's tiny flickers, moving slowly, like a constellation that had decided to walk the earth. It was gratitude in motion. Haruko held up one lantern and bowed, long and deep. Others followed, one after another. A wave of silent thanks. Cooper watched them disappear into the darkness, a faint orange spine winding toward their new refuge. "They'll be all right," he said quietly. Klein nodded. "They were always going to try. We just gave them a chance." O'Connor closed her eyes for a moment. "Tomorrow they'll start building again. And they'll find the tools," Navarro added. "And they'll know someone believed they could do it." Cooper stepped away from the river, boots leaving clean prints on the wet earth. "Let's get some sleep," he said. "Dawn comes quick in these valleys." And that was the simple truth. Dawn always came quicker when someone had earned it. October 7th, 1945, 5:12. Morning crept over the valley without ceremony, thin light pushing past the mountains, brushing the river with a bruised gold. Mist rose in slow columns from the wrecked abutments. As if the water itself was exhaling after a long night, the villagers reached the river first. Haruko led them, carrying a bundle of cloth strips for marking safe pathways. Ichiro trotted beside her, wearing oversized sandals gifted by a neighbor whose own children were grown. The older woman Navarro had carried walked with a cane now, supported by her husband. Every footstep was a question. What did the water leave behind? They reached the bank. The boy was the first to see the shape. "Sensei, tools!" Haruko followed his pointing hand. There, arranged neatly along the torn earth where the American bridge had begun, lay the crates and bundles, dry, organized, intentional, not tossed, not lost, left. A hammer glinted in the new sun. The villagers approached with the reverence of touching something sacred. Haruko knelt first. "They trusted us," she whispered. The others bowed their heads. The older men examined the tools, not to decide whether they were worthy of using them, but to decide how quickly they could begin. The cutting saws were sharp. The ropes were strong. The pulleys were new. Everything chosen for durability, not charity. Ichiro lifted a wooden mallet almost as big as his torso and grinned. "We fixed the bridge," he declared. His voice echoed across the water like a promise. 5:25. What the Americans didn't see on the western bank. The engineers were rolling up canvas and stamping out a small cook fire. They couldn't see the villagers from here. They couldn't see Ichiro lifting his mallet or Haruko pressing her palms together in thanks, but they didn't need to. Cooper stretched his back and slung a bag over his shoulder. "River's dropping already," he said. "Good sign. They'll have an easier time today." Navarro adjusted his pack. "Think they'll rebuild it the same way?" O'Connor shook her head. "No, they'll build it their way. And it'll hold." Klein checked his compass, set the bearing, and nodded toward the road. "Form up. We've got 4 miles before we see breakfast." The men fell in, footsteps muffled by damp soil. None of them looked back. Not because they were indifferent, but because sometimes the best way to honor a thing is to trust it to grow without you. 6 o'clock. Haruko's decision on the far bank. Haruko stood before the line of tools like a general before her troops. "We begin today," she said. The villagers nodded. No hesitation. No debate. The first beam wasn't lifted until almost 7 o'clock. But when it rose, slow, steady, shoulders straining, it felt like the valley itself exhaled. Not hope. Not charity. Momentum. One villager murmured. "The Americans gave us strength." Haruko corrected gently. "They gave us tools. We give ourselves strength." The river calmed. The sun warmed the banks. The sound of saws, mallets, and voices replaced fear with purpose. Ichiro climbed the stump of a felled cedar and looked across the water. "Do you think they know we are working?" he asked. Haruko smiled faintly. Engineers always know when their work continues. And in that single moment, Ichiro understood the deeper truth. The Americans had not just built a bridge. They had handed over a reason to stand upright after the war tried to bend everyone to the earth. A new foundation had taken shape. Cruder than the American version. Simpler. But theirs, a bridge not given rebuilt. The tools glinted in the sun, passed from hand to hand, leaving blisters and courage in equal measure. Every plank lifted was a message to the future. We survived. And we chose to rebuild, not because we were rescued, but because someone believed we could. On the road beyond the ridge, the American engineers vanished over a hill dot by evening. Villagers swore the river sounded different. Less angry. Less hungry. As if it too approved. In the years that followed, the bridge the villagers built was repaired twice, widened once, and eventually replaced altogether. New roads came. New houses rose. Children who grew up after the war barely remembered the way the river used to swallow the path whole and leave only silence in its wake. But one detail remained in the villages, oral history softly spoken, carefully preserved. The Americans left the tools, not because they pitied them, not because they wanted gratitude, but because they understood something deeper than orders, deeper than warfare, deeper than occupation. A repaired bridge lasts a season. A trusted people rebuild their world. Sergeant Cooper would later tell his grandson that it was the simplest decision he ever made. Tools aren't just steel, he said. They're faith you can hold in your hands. Lieutenant Klein kept a photograph from that valley for decades mist rising off the river. Villagers bowed in greeting, the bridge half built behind them. There's a difference between winning a war and ending one, he once wrote in a letter. Only one lets the world breathe again. And in Yamagata Prefecture, Haruko kept the mallet Ichiro lifted that morning. Wooden head worn smooth. Handle darkened from generations of work. She hung it above the doorway of the rebuilt school as a reminder that strength does not always march in uniform. Sometimes it kneels first. Sometimes it listens before it builds. When she grew old, Haruko would tell the younger villagers, those soldiers brought more than lumber. They brought dawn. Not sunlight dawn of the mind. They showed us that even shattered people can rise again if someone leaves the tools where we can reach them. In time, the river changed course slightly, as rivers do, but the memory never shifted. Foreign soldiers came to a shattered valley, built what they could, and trusted strangers to finish the rest. Peace was not signed that day. It was built. One beam at a time, one handoff at a time, one quiet act of mercy strong enough to outlive the war. Subscribe for more true stories that remind us of what it means to be human, even in the darkest of times.